Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Andrew Lind. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and I'm pleased to announce our panel, Press Any Key to Start, How to Build an Esports Brand. This panel is part of the business track presented by Ticketmaster. Our panelists today are Casey Chafkin, Chief Revenue Officer at Skills, David Higdon, Global Head of Communications Esports at Riot Games, Nicole LaPointe-Jamieson, CEO at Evil Geniuses, and our panel today will be moderated by Saj Cherian, partner at Kinetic, which owns Fanatics and RuPaul Group. Our panel will run for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes of Q&A after. You can submit your questions via Twitter using the hashtag PressAnyKey. And with that, I'll hand it off to Saj.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So welcome to the esports panel. Press any key to start. We will be hearing from three of the esports industry's leaders across teams, game publishers, platform developers, for the keys on not just how to build an esports team, but also an esports brand. But before we dig in, let's begin with how each of our panelists got their start in esports. Let's start with Nicole. Now, you entered esports as an investor with a private equity firm, Peak 6, that specializes in distressed assets. So what was it about Evil Geniuses that was distressing, but yet so interesting that you decided to jump in?
Yes. Thank you so much. So I have joined Evil Geniuses a little less than a year ago, previously working in private equity, and I led a team of people that did diligence on deals in the tech, AR, VR, and gaming space. And esports was one of those ephemeral types of topics that you see things pop up on, and a lot of the teams in the space weren't really at a maturity level for a private equity style investor to come in. And then more than a year ago, Evil Geniuses, which is one of the oldest teams in the space, came to us with a very clear ask and very clear looking for guidance and business maturity to help bolster their gaming excellence. So it was a good fit for a more mature, later stage investor. We ended up acquiring Evil Geniuses in May. I rolled in full time and haven't looked back since.
And how did you make that transition from investor to CEO?
Prior to my time working at Peak 6, I actually was on their both deal investment team as well as our operations team. So I worked in multiple distressed asset companies at various altitudes, running small teams to being chief of staff of 700-person organizations. I've always loved leadership, and the opportunity to lead a team in a space I cared about and really help build and bolster and revitalize a brand was very exciting. So candidly, when we were doing the deal, I was really hoping for a board seat, and the joke's on me. I'm now running this organization, but it's been fantastic.
So be careful what you wish for, right? Yes. So I'm going to skip over to Casey. Now, Casey, a decade ago, you were here at the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference as an MBA from that other business school across the river. How did you get from sitting in the audience to getting up here on stage? Can you sort of take us through your journey from the mobile payment startup world to mobile gaming and now esports at Skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, 10 years ago, sitting in the audience, I was at HBS, and while I was at HBS, I started working at what at the time was a 4-person angel-backed startup with a really cool invention, and that was mobile self-checkouts. This is 2009, first-gen iPhone, subsequent release of the App Store, and my co-founder at Skills had founded a company called Buyer that was focused on enabling mobile payments for large retailers, and so think self-checkout using a consumer smartphone. We were building that business, ended up building it to about 50 people. We had raised about $12 million. We were based in Boston. We were predominantly in the same space that Square was in, and so Square was going bottoms up in that market, and we were going top down. Square had raised about $20 million, then they raised 200. We had a kind of an existential decision to make at that point with $12 million having been raised and our primary competitor with 200. We didn't control that business, and so we ended up running a process and transacting Buyer, and it became what is today Intuit GoPayment, which in business school, everyone talks to you about the exit. They say, what's your exit strategy? And so you kind of think that this is what you're going for, is the exit. And from a financial perspective, in a lot of ways it is, because the money was life-changing. But what Intuit wanted to do with the technology felt just so far short of where I thought the overarching opportunity was. And so I left on the transaction, learned a valuable lesson about what motivates me, and had been talking to the founder of that company about this idea he had in the gaming space. And we saw several trends emerging at that time. One was that games were increasingly being played as sports. Video games were kind of hitting that 50-year milestone that historically has been a really important milestone for games in general. So if you think about football's invention in 1869 and the formation of the NFL 50 years later in 1920, or basketball's invention in the 1890s and the NBA formation in the 1940s, it takes about 50 years for games to become sports. And so we saw that video games were starting to be played competitively as sports, and pairing with that, mobile was making everyone into a gamer. Now, they don't call themselves gamers. The term gamer tends to mean something very specific, but almost everyone plays video games today. And for me, I was playing Words with Friends in 2012, and I would think I was in these heated competitions with people on the other side of the world, going back and forth, and I was like, I'm gonna get them. And then they wouldn't make a move for 7 days. Zynga would say, you won. And I had this sense of like, I didn't actually win that competition. The person literally forgot I existed. And competition is what gives reason to the games that we play. And there's nothing so emotionally draining as thinking that you are engaged in a competitive experience that you care a tremendous about only to find out that your counterparty cares so little that they fell asleep or something. And so we saw these kind of the convergence of these trends and created a platform technology company called Skills. And that the idea with Skills was that video games are going to evolve in the same way offline sports have evolved, where they start as games, then they're played casually first, then they're played competitively in player-funded competitions, and then ultimately brands become involved and bring the best athletes together to compete at the highest level, and brands pay for that to reach advertisers. And so we built this technology platform to enable any game to be played competitively, with the thesis that we didn't know which games were going to be the most popular esports of tomorrow, but we believed that the best games had yet to be invented. And so today we power several competitions and several thousand different mobile games. We run a couple million competitions per day, and just continue to grow.
Got it. So David, you started your career in the traditional sports world.
Yep.
With roles in tennis, with golf, and racing, most recently with NASCAR. Why the pivot to esports?
Now I'm sitting next to somebody who works for Evil Geniuses.
There you go.
I mean, how pretty badass is that?
So was that the reason for your pivot to esports?
For sure, for sure.
So maybe tell us a little bit about, given your role at Riot, where you're leading branding and communications, what did you learn from sort of the traditional world of sports that you've brought into esports, and maybe what surprised you along the way?
I actually started studying esports in my previous job. Got really excited about it through my work as a board member at the University of Oregon in their sports business program, and really encouraged them to actually bring in students who are interested in the esports space. So when Riot called about this opportunity, I was definitely intrigued. I see it really as the future of sport, the way the fans consume sports through the streaming apps, through everything that we're doing, whether it's events, whether it's creating content. It's an incredible space. And I think Casey touched on a little bit that we're really just scratching the surface. Nicole's point is a good one, really, because she got in and she knows that Evil Geniuses has a long run and that they're going to be at the forefront. They're somebody who's been around for a while. Riot's been around for 10 years, which is really just a drop in the bucket. We started with one game called League of Legends. Hopefully some of you have played that game. And it's just grown into this global phenomenon. Now it's clearly the leading esport. It's attracting fans from all over the world. We turn around and suddenly just hundreds of thousands of people are playing in Vietnam. Things like that are just happening. So it's exciting. We have 1,800 people in our offices in Los Angeles. We're about 3,000 worldwide, and we're just now introducing our second, third, and fourth games. So it's
early innings.
It's early days, and we're pretty excited, pretty bullish about it.
Well, Well, in the battle of brands between esports leagues that are built around game titles and the esports teams, which are spanning multiple leagues, who's best positioned to win the loyalty of the players and ultimately the fans? Why don't we start with our team CEO? So, Nicole, still early days in esports. Should we bet on the leagues or should we bet on the teams, and why?
The players.
The players.
No.
Tell us more.
Yeah, so you see this in traditional sports, but even more heavily in esports, just given that the content consumption and fan affiliation is really at the player level. Organizations, esports teams run like a collegiate athletics department. You have a parent brand with players that represent that brand, but people tend to be fans of players, and there's no transference across titles. So on the organization side, it's been a challenge for us that I've come in and really tried to tackle with what is the org brand that fans find affinity to beyond the players, because in esports, players have high churn. It's a retirement age that's relatively early. It's a short-lived general window of competition and competitive play. And it is sometimes a struggle to, especially if you have diverse brands where fans don't necessarily like to watch League of Legends and Counter-Strike. They tend to be fans of a player in a specific game. Trying to find that linkage factor to bridge that audience affinity teams are trying to figure that out.
I would amplify that as well. I mean, even though we are a publisher and we're creating a game that's amazing, our mission, our philosophy is player first. So to Nicole's point, they look at things through the players' lenses, so do we as a publisher. Everything we do, the first question we ask is, how are the players going to respond to this? How are they going to embrace it? They're our primary advocates and our detractors. So we look at our game as something that has to be appealing to players and has to be appealing for a long time. We're only in it for the long run. We're not looking for short-term glory. We're not looking for profits immediately. We're looking to build something that's special. That's where the riot comes from. Ultimately, Brandon Beck and Mark Merrill created a system at Riot Games in which it was free to play. They didn't like the way you would go out and have to decide between which games, which consoles you were using, and they went free to play, and they said competitive integrity is first and foremost. The only way we're going to make profit is if the players want to give us money. And that's ultimately what they created, a game that the $2 billion that it creates during a year is through cosmetic skins primarily that are by choice from the players to choose to use them. It's not impacting how they play.
And was this player-first approach, is that different than other developers, like take Activision Blizzard with the Overwatch League? Like, were you guys taking a very different approach to them in terms of how you sort of maybe the latitude you gave to teams versus what might be considered kind of more league controlled? Like, tell us about the thinking behind.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about esports that people, I'm sure Nicole and certainly Casey know, is that people like to put it into one bucket, right? But ultimately, you need to think of esports the same way you think of sports. So people talk about, hey, should esports be in the Olympics? That's literally like saying, should sports be in the Olympics? Okay. Because Overwatch and Fortnite and League of Legends and our upcoming Valorant, those are completely different sports, different in how they're run, different in terms of their fan bases, but our focus is just make sure that what we're creating is going to be lasting and that they'll know that we'll stick with them. So the mastery of League of Legends is so high, it takes so long to be good. Nicole was just talking about her experience with it. She's undefeated, by the way, in League of Legends, just for the record. It takes a long time to get good. You don't want your publisher bailing on you or suddenly changing in a way that dramatically impacts you. So our focus is on making sure that when we have a player, that we provide them with such amazing value, they want to just keep coming back and back. It's one of the beauties of our sport, too. I was talking to Daryl Morey yesterday, and he was talking about how the analytics are tough in esports, and in particular League of Legends. He used to run a team, Clutch Gaming, in our LCS, our North American League, because we change our game every 2 weeks. It's literally like we can change the game to impact it in a way that we think is a better viewing experience and better for the players. That would be like Adam Silver saying, you know what, Steph's hitting way too many three-pointers. I'm gonna pull the three-point line in 2 inches. We actually can do that. That impacts the sport and the playing field in a very dramatic way.
So the games that we just were talking about, right? League of Legends, Overwatch, et cetera, occupy the realm of PCs and consoles, right? And we're really talking about professional gamers, and maybe Nicole's going to become a professional gamer soon. Sounds like League of Legends could be the answer for her. But how about for the rest of us, right? How about for those on mobile phones? And so, Casey, I want to sort of direct this next question to you. What does skills mean? Skills means by esports for everyone. Is the future of esports really mobile?
Certainly that's what we think, and we think the future, I mentioned mobile has made everyone or almost everyone into a gamer, and they don't self-describe as gamers, but they play, and the notion of saying I'm not a gamer is akin to saying like I'm not a music listener, which no one would say. They would answer, if you said do you listen to music, someone would answer with a 2-vector response. So they'd answer with a question of frequency and intensity. So I listen to music all the time or every so often, and I listen very intently. I'm an audiophile, or I have it on in the background while I cook. And as a media form, that's how music is consumed. Gaming is the same thing. And so everyone now plays games. It's a question of frequency and intensity. And for people who play games, competition becomes the logical next step of it is intrinsically built into the gaming experience. And so our belief was that the electronic sports ecosystem will mirror the offline sports ecosystem, where many more people will play than will play at a professional level. And so you'll have sports that look like running, where the participatory audience is massive. So like if you ask the audience here how many of you play sports, almost everyone would answer with some form of the affirmation. They'd say like I run in the mornings, or I bowl with my kids, I golf on the weekends, I ski, but I'm not very good. But very few people would answer and say like I'm not a professional basketball player, so no, I don't play sports. And I think that's today, if you ask people, do you play esports, they will answer as though you asked them, are you in the NBA? And our belief in the creation of skills was that very similar to Nike's motto of like, if you have a body, you are an athlete. If you play competitive games, you are participating in esports. And so skills is predicated on the idea of creating competition that is broadly accessible for people who play any game and at any level and any skill aptitude. And so everything in our business was designed to say, how do we make this the most inclusive ecosystem possible, from a player perspective of bringing those players in, and from a developer perspective of saying, we don't know which games are going to have the popularity to become League of Legends, which is the most popular game, or are going to become the equivalent of lawn darts, which people play in the offline world, but there isn't a professional league for.
So David, what's Riot's take on mobile gaming? There are like, what, 2.6 billion mobile gamers out there around the world, but most of them are outside the US. Is the future of esports mobile, or is that just an Asian phenomenon?
No, we think it's very much a global phenomenon, and we have the mobile version of our game called Wild Rift, which we showed to our fans at our 10th anniversary event in October, a sneak peek. When that will actually come online will be TBD. Whether
no spoiler alerts here?
No spoiler alerts, but hopefully soon. I'm excited about it. I was able to do an early test, and to capture the breadth of what makes League of Legends such an amazing game to play on a mobile phone is a huge challenge, but I think they nailed it. We probably missed the boat on mobile early, but we are focused on creating that experience with League of Legends through the PC. But we've seen that that's the future, and agree that we'll be part of it. Certainly something that I'm sure Nicole and Casey know that that's going to be something that we're going to be a big part of in the future.
Got it. So Bob Iger, who until last week was the CEO of the world's largest media company, described his role simply as a brand manager. So let's ask our panelists how they are differentiating themselves in what's become a very crowded field. Nicole, what does it mean to be an evil genius? How did you reinvigorate a brand that was founded in the late 90s, which I guess in esports time is pretty ancient?
Yes, it was interesting for myself coming in. Evil Geniuses actually just recently went through a brand revitalization, which we'll be rolling out over the next coming months as well, where the challenge was to keep the best aspects of a 21-year brand and preserve that authenticity and the fan and player voice, while also well positioning the organization for forward-looking opportunities. Esports right now is very beholden to sponsorship, to partnerships, to broadcast and media deals, and making sure our brand identity is attractive to the types of brands we want to both work with as well as can afford to work with us, as was really critical. And during our brand revitalization, we looked a lot at how to not just hit table stakes, but differentiate in the market. So we actually took a very polarizing stance. We were one of the first movers to really carve out who we were and who we were not. And so Evil Geniuses are bold, are saucy. We encourage the individuality of our players. Like when we were doing a discovery period, we were asking both our players and other players, what do you think of when you hear EG is coming to this tournament? And we had a reputation of a little bit of the heel, a little bit of the team to beat, but also a really strong legacy of excellence. So both how we operationalize that as well as how we represent that visually is in things that are different from the rest. We have very harsh lines, dark colors. We encourage people to be a bit more saucy in their social, and it's kind of like the Harley-Davidson model, right? Differentiated through individuality, which really is accessible to all, but it's still excellent, still top of the line. And it's been interesting in reception of the space because we were one of the first movers to really take a hard, differentiated stance on, we're not just a team that wins in esports, we're a team that wins and.
And what was the reception like, coming out of the gates? Like, how did the fans react?
Very mixed bag, as I'm sure many people know. When you take a logo or a visual identity that's existed for 20 years and change it, there's always affinity and grumpiness that subsequently comes up with that. However, in terms of a lot of the metrics you would look at for success, in terms of followers, in terms of positive engagement, in terms of sponsorship dollars, it's been really successful because we can actually sell. And what a lot of esports teams struggle with right now is everyone's saying the same things. Oh, we have eyeballs and Gen Z loves us and we compete. But how do you actually articulate to especially non-endemic brands why you should work with an esports organization for us to say, here are your values, and here's how our brand also reaffirms those values, and here's how we have the eyeballs and the market share that fuels this vision that you have. It's been really successful for us.
Okay. So Casey, Nielsen says that 77% of esports fans are male. But among skills players, the gender breakdown is, I think, roughly 50-50. So how are you managing your brand, given your differentiated demographic?
Yeah, I think the flaw in Nielsen's methodology is they are saying, do you watch one of a half dozen games that involve shooting, or they're basically the pinnacle of esports today has come to be defined and synonymous with the industry itself, whereas we, as I mentioned, believe that if you play games competitively, you are competing in electronic sports. And so about half of our players are men, half are women. We see almost no difference across the player base in terms of income, education level. It's the people play different games, but gaming and competition are ubiquitous. And that's something that we have to think very carefully about, because we do have a relationship with the players, but the players' first relationship is with the game in which they are competing. And so the goal for us is to best enable the businesses in the ecosystem who are building games on the platform. And we have a growing number of game studios who are saying, I want to build a competitive experience, and I'm going after a specific underserved demographic. And so we prioritize inclusiveness as a result of that, and really try to work with the individual game studios to best enable them to define the brand that they want to have with their player base. And for us, it's saying, like, if you're interested in games, you should compete, and that really is that makes us maybe a little bit less of a consumer personality. I'd say the term esports for everyone, our average player is playing about an hour and 5 minutes a day on systems. So like more than Facebook, about what a Netflix consumer is doing, but they are self-describing as a non-gamer or a casual gamer. And so esports for everyone is really a business-to-business tagline more so than a consumer tagline. And we let the consumer brands define the engagement that they want to have with their end users.
Great. Well, it's worth remembering that esports really started as a marketing tool for publishers to build interest in and fans of their various game titles. But now they really become a marketing tool for leading brands outside of esports. So which brands do we think are going to win by getting into esports? David, let me direct the first question to you.
I'll answer that right away. MasterCard, Louis Vuitton, Nike.
Yeah.
Want me to keep going?
Yeah. Well, so
they're all going to win.
So you mentioned Louis Vuitton. Are there any brands in the audience? David would love to talk to you. But tell us about what you did with Louis Vuitton. So you built they built a special trunk not only for the FIFA World Cup, but for the League of Legends World Championship trophy known as the Summoners Cup, right?
Yep.
So why the partnership with the famed luxury brand?
So it was interesting. What happened there is we struck an agreement. We were introduced to them last year. Really, MasterCard kind of unlocked for us non-endemic brands when they came on board in 2018, and we actually were talking to them for 2 years. We were actually getting crushed by a lot of people out there saying like, Riot Games doesn't have a good BD department. A lot of other publishers were bringing in all these sponsors, but we were very clear that we weren't going to sell for 5 digits because we knew our product was worth 7+, okay? So we held back. MasterCard eventually came on board, and what happened was people like Louis Vuitton, Nike, and others realized that this was a sport they wanted to be part of. Louis Vuitton came in through the door you just mentioned, which is we'll do a trophy case similar to what we do with FIFA World Cup. But when they got to know us better, they realized there was a deeper universe to play in. So we worked with them in creating Louis Vuitton skins. We worked with them to create a capsule collection of merchandise. They provided custom-made watches for the champions of the winners of the Summoners Cup this year, and it kept going. It was one of those things that, all good partnerships are certainly a two-way street, and we were just tickled pink with the reaction, and just kind of saw that it was something that made for a resonant experience for our players. So right now, I'm currently maining Senna, and I have a Louis Vuitton skin, and it's pretty cool to be in the game, and you're watching this thing turn into this fashion icon, and it kind of covers up how bad I am in the game, so,
Yeah. So you at least look good while you're playing.
I look
right?
good while I'm losing, yes. It's okay.
That's good. So Nicole, how do you choose the brands and sponsors that you partner with? I saw that you work closely with Monster Energy. So why are you picking them versus let's say a Red Bull? What are the qualities that you're considering when choosing partners?
Yes, definitely. So esports teams are very beholden to sponsorships, and I'm proud to uphold the legacy of EG, which was one of the first esports teams to ever sign non-endemic sponsors. So Monster is actually one of our oldest partnerships. It's 9 years old this year. And we look for brands that really, as I mentioned earlier, articulate and reinforce our core values. If you look at even our endemic and non-endemic partners, Monster, Razer, AMD, they tend to be more of the counterculture, best-in-line product, but a bit more edgy rather than other brands per se. And it's good because, especially since esports teams, like traditional sports teams, their most valuable inventory asset is oftentimes the players who have very limited time, right? We want them focusing on competing and practicing, not necessarily doing things for sponsors, making sure we diversify what we offer in regards to what we add in terms of value with partners, as well as find partners that understand our vision, our expectations for working with our players and our org is really important. So it's been exciting because we've fostered a really good, diverse mix of partners that are more straightforward, to peripheral partners, hardware partners, as well as partners that are more on the organizational development or business side, or peripheral fueling of things that we use in the day-to-day life cycle as an esports athlete.
I think the maturation of the sport is reflected in her response because she knows full well that Red Bull is a sponsor of the league, and we have the ability to provide value to these partners, whether it's through the players, through the teams, through the leagues, through our events, in a deep way, and our players respond to that. So one of the things that we're trying to do as a publisher is create several avenues for teams to be successful, players to be successful, and for us to be successful. So, Red Bull is a sponsor for us. They're a sponsor of G2, one of the top teams in Europe, if not arguably the top team in Europe, as well as one of our leagues in Brazil, for example. And so it's good to see that brands like Monster and Red Bull and others like it are coming in and finding enough value in this space to be able to rationalize the ROI in their spend.
Right. So, Casey, let's talk about the offline world. How are you helping bridge the gap between sort of mobile and in-person events? You did an interesting partnership with Bolero. Can you say more about the type of partners that Skills is pursuing?
Sure. And broadly, our thesis is that the offline and online worlds are on a collision course, that the digital enablement of the world, the gamification of the world, the proliferation of motion trackers that you wear on your wrist, the always-on computer that you have in your pocket as a phone. These worlds are converging, and so eventually, just as David was saying, I think you won't call this esports. You'll call it sports, and there will be offline sports, there will be online sports, and those will coexist, and you'll have increasingly activities in sports that encapsulate versions of or attributes of both. And so we recently did a partnership with Bolero. Bolero is the largest operator of bowling alleys in North America. So they own the majority of bowling alleys. They also own the PBA, the Professional Bowlers Association. And our partnership with them, their interest is in extending their bowling brand to consumers both at their bowling centers and outside of their bowling centers. And so the way that you can participate in the sports ecosystem is as a fan or as a player. They want to create that experience on a player and at a fan base for both digital and physical worlds. So we connected them with one of our game developers who will be releasing a Bolero bowling game. They're going to be hosting electronic sports competitions at the bowling alleys themselves, with prizes that include things like lane time, free shoes, arcade gift cards, and then consumers will be able to play in those competitions at home as well. And so the sport is still bowling, and there's an electronic version, there's a physical version. There are venues where people get together and participate in these competitions, and whether you're participating by grabbing a ball and lobbing it down some planks of wood, or grabbing your phone and participating in a digitally simulated version of that, it's all part of this brand, the bowling brand for them. And so we did that partnership and have a number of other kind of similar offline brands that are interested in that type of extension.
So this being the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, we should pretty quickly get to how data can set your brand apart. So unlike the on-field, on-court, and on-ice sports, esports are played entirely online, so generating terabits of data to analyze. Nicole, now I understand that you've built one, if not the only in-house data science team within an esports team, is that right?
We're probably one of a few of this size, as well as the application for us. Data is really important. We have full-time data science team, as well as engineering team and BI team that all kind of use data to help inform decisions. And this might seem, well, it hopefully should seem obvious to most other mature industries, but it's relatively new in the space of esports despite being a digital platform. And part of that is just because there wasn't money available for esports organizations to really flesh out more laterally in the past, but also we're beholden to developers for a lot of data, which make access to some of this underlying platform variable by what developer or what platform we're competing on. But we've had a very big and so far successful initiative to not just diversify where potential revenue can come from, but also inform decisions on the competitive side, on the roster construction side, even on the sponsor side, how we use our reach and how our competition works to really define and articulate strategy, which we're doing all in-house versus outsourcing. So it's been early stages. I've been in this, we've rolled out this initiative about 8 months ago, and we're growing, but so far it's been really interesting and a great value add, especially on the sponsor and BI side.
So what edge are you giving either your business executives or your players, like, you know, with this in-house data science capability?
Yeah, there's a definite mix depending on how you want to apply it. I think the most linear application is in gaming. We have some platforms that you cannot emulate elsewhere in the space where we can predict positional movement on a map by capturing like live feed and image recognition, and then we can use predictive analytics to figure out, okay, we're playing this team, they might draft these characters there, and we anticipate them to move in these directions on the space, so this is how we set a strategy. And that's not something you can currently buy in the space, nor is it provided by a developer. It required a lot of bootstrapping and building in-house, and that's really tangible value for us in constructing how we draft pick and ban during certain matches. More broadly on like the business side, being able to provide information, especially to non-endemic potential partners or sponsors who don't really understand esports yet or don't really understand why they would derive value, the more specific and bespoke with targeted information on shared either customer bases or demographics or geographic regions has been helpful, because even though that sounds obvious, we're a relative first mover for that in the space.
Okay. Well, David, Riot has partnered with Nielsen to bring viewership metrics such as average minutes audience, or AMA, to esports. Tell us what is AMA and why are such metrics so important to marketers? And what other metrics are you using to really drive and build fan engagement?
Yeah, so we're real proud to be part of the industry that's moved toward the average minute audience, which is, as it says, it's what your average is during a single minute during a match, and moving away from kind of the bigger numbers that sound great and we were able to at least use, but then it becomes an arms race. In fact, the student who actually ran this conference here, Greg Kim, who now works for Nicole, he was part of the team at Riot who really pushed to get a metric that would allow us to compare ourselves and work with partners who are interested in traditional sports as well. So the AMA is a common metric used for almost all traditional sports, and we felt it was an important. So this year, we crushed it in the World Championships, the biggest event we've ever had in Paris, and we were at a 21.8, which is a massive number. But we were out there before, and people were saying 100 million uniques and all this kind of stuff, and so we've kind of netted out on that. The other piece, with our partnership with Nielsen and others, Sport Radar, Baze, is that we also are looking at a more comparable metric to the viewing experience. So we call it Live Plus, because as you know, our audience, they're watching the sport in a very deep way. They're watching it live, but then they're also going back and looking at VODs and particularly honing in on a player on Evil Geniuses or somebody who's playing for Cloud9, and will watch that video again and again, and really derive a lot of deep content that way. So we are working with them to identify so it's a more clear measure of the consumer experience that's not just that kind of quick hit on the Monday morning, which makes traditional sports analytics experts quiver in their boots when they're getting like, what's that number coming out the day after? Ours is going to have a lot of really positive trailing metrics because the fans consume it in a much deeper way.
Got it. So many of the students in the audience here today, I'm looking around the room here, are here because they are looking for the secret to getting into the business of esports. So, Casey, I heard that the engineering team at Skills, which is led by a woman, is 33% female, which is more than twice the ratio at Uber and higher than at Apple's, Google's, and Facebook's. Tell us about your approach to talent and skills and how that's maybe different than, other esports organizations.
Yeah, and I'll tell you about what Skills is doing, and I don't want to opine about what other companies are doing, but so we actually take a very analytical approach to hiring, and it's predicated on quite a bit of aptitude testing. And so the idea is saying if you take any job and you deconstruct that job into the required skills that you need to be successful in that job, how can you measure someone's aptitude for each of those skills? And so traditional interviewing involves you take a panel of people and say, you're going to go talk to this person and try to assess whether they would be good at this job. And often those people if you take 5 people, they're going to have 5 relatively redundant conversations. Our approach is saying, let's deconstruct into 5 skills, then figure out how we're going to test for those skills. Then as we hire people over time, we're going to learn where our testing makes sense and leads to positive outcomes, and where if we said, hey, you need action orientation to be successful in this role. If we end up having someone who's a bad fit and they didn't have action orientation, we say, well, what made us think that this person was going to have that attribute, and where did we go wrong? And so the traditional behavioral-based way of interviewing ends up being pretty flawed, because companies will kind of commingle what it looks like to be an engineer with what makes someone good at engineering. And so if the Billy Beane quote of like, we're not here to sell jeans, right? You look at someone, you say, does this person look like a baseball player? That same thing happens in engineering. Does this person look like an engineer? And more often than not, what our stereotypical vision of an engineer isn't reflective of what someone's actual skills are. And so certainly we try to hire diversity, but the composition of our engineering team is driven by our ability to hire analytically, as opposed to hiring candidates because they have the right degree or have the background that we think is going to make them good at their job. And so if other companies are using cultural fit as a euphemism for latent bias, that actually gives us a competitive advantage in hiring, because our compensation offers are going to be based purely on aptitude rather than some notion of background or ethnicity, gender, or something else that's completely uncorrelated with someone's ability to do the job.
Yeah, well, Nicole, when you traded the board seat for the CEO hat, what changes did you bring to Evil Geniuses and on how you build teams, how you sort of recruit and develop talent? And I'm referring to not just your business executives, but your players as well.
So building off of what Casey said, we have a similar approach, and it might surprise the audience that I don't look like what you would expect a gamer to look like. But that's the Evil Genius way. We hire on merit, and what we do to promote inclusivity and diversity on both players as well as staff talent side is we have a very high bar, and we make sure the doors are open and accessible to everyone. And then you go through the same rigorous hiring process that you'd go through on other places. Our mission statement's actually to make people want to work at Evil Geniuses, and the nuance there is that the brand itself has a prestige and the infrastructure and the reputation to bring in excellence, so we can make things that, especially in the esports space, that didn't exist before, like maternity and paternal leave, 401k with match. We go to colleges and do career fairs. We just look for initiatives to bring in talent and showcase that anyone could find a home and work well on the competition side or the staff side at EG. And I'm super pleased. Like in my year here, we've grown quite a bit. We started from 12 FTEs to now we just broke 75 in my past year. And we have now a leadership team that is 50% female, which is not through looking for females, it's through looking for the best and building a positive reputation. We have some of the most LGBTQ and non-American players, and we really foster excellence and inclusivity across all scales of the business through merit and excellence.
Are you bringing a different set of folks, into esports, into the business of esports? Tell us a little bit about
Yes.
how, again, if you're looking at this audience here, are you recruiting, MBAs or, folks from traditional sports? Give us a flavor of that composition of the 60 or so people that you've hired.
Oh, I'm glad you asked this question because coming in not from esports, I got a lot of, the space is young, so it's a little bit gate kept on, well, gamer culture and esports culture, but that is a self-perpetuating cycle that I'm looking to really grow and exceed the table stakes today. So my leadership team is a mix of people that both have been born and bred in esports as well as come from MBA programs. I'm going to put Greg Kim on blast again. He is a poached hire, was an MIT grad. That comes from a data background. We have people that come from fintech. We have people that come from large corporations in tech and engineering. We have a mixture of very prestigious college grads as well as some leaders that actually haven't gone to college at EG. And through hiring with a very metric and scorecard driven approach, we've found really good success in bringing in a great depth and breadth of skills and backgrounds to the table that you didn't really see before in other organizations. So that's how we really operationally try to differentiate to make sure we can get the best of the best wherever they come from, because new ideas coming to the table are what helps us innovate.
Great. So before I jump to the audience questions, I want to talk a little bit about geography. So David, what are your thoughts on geolocation or geoaffiliation to generate fan interest? Do you think this is necessary, or that teams already have, a strong connection with their fans?
I think more the latter. I think geolocation can definitely work in esports. We've successfully built the most successful geolocated league in China. So our LPL league has 17 teams. Top players are making $2-3 million a year. We're playing in 6 different cities, obviously not now, but we're also a digital sport, so we're about to launch on Monday. We're going to restart the season in China, and it's going to be online only. So that's one of the beauties of esports. I do believe some other leagues have different approaches that may work for them. Our philosophy is we're going to build a global sport, but we're going to let the regions have the ability to customize for their audience. So North America is a different type of league right now. The teams are all based in Los Angeles. Is there a world in the future where they would move to different cities in North America? Possibly. China, it made more sense initially, and that's why it's been super successful. Europe will be interesting to see if there is a potential to do country-based. But right now, we're still making sure that the teams are successful. If you start flying people all over and all that kind of stuff, the costs skyrocket.
Right.
So our philosophy has been, let's build an ecosystem where the players first and the teams can be successful before we go too far, too fast. And I believe that has proven to be a successful formula.
Got it. So we have some active questions here from the Twitter group, so I'm gonna jump to those. So this is an interesting one. What do you think will be the key in bridging the gap between yearly fan spend in esports, which they approximated at $5, and fan spend in traditional sports at $700? Who wants to take that?
So I'm not sure where the data is coming from.
Yeah, this is
interesting piece,
user generated,
but
audience generated.
Keep in mind that the gaming space is way bigger than the sports space, just to be clear, and bigger than the movie industry. It's a huge, successful, deep area. People are spending money in hundreds of different ways. I think the crux of that question is really around generating income through events. Esports, we've been focused, I can speak for Riot Games, we've been focused on making events very accessible. We don't, have super expensive tickets. Our events sell out literally in minutes online, but we're not gouging the customers because we're still trying to grow the base, right? We want to get to a point where people understand it before we start getting down those revenue channels. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we held back on sponsorship because we felt like the game needed to grow organically before we started injecting partners into it. Now our fans see that they actually bring massive value and do things like trunks and in-game skins and things that really provide value to them. So I think the same thing true is on media rights. We haven't really gone down that path yet. So traditional sports is built a lot on the media rights deals that they have in place. That's just something we've wanted to build the fan base first before we've moved. But I think over the next few years, you're going to see some pretty impressive numbers. The first one in our world came out of China. It's not officially announced yet, but Bilibili is going to be moving toward a partnership with us, starting with Worlds this year, and it's going to be pretty significant.
So start with the product first, the media will follow?
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
So another
So
question.
for example, I know, we shared today that we're doing a TFT showcase, our new set with our auto chess game this week, and it'll be on Twitch, it'll be on YouTube, it'll be on numerous other channels because we want people just to see what it's like, and then we'll learn. At some point, obviously, you're seeing a lot of movement in the streaming space. It's really cool, and it's providing opportunities for players. It's providing opportunities for streamers to go exclusive. So it's a space that, certainly the two of us here and Casey as well are looking very closely at.
So if players are the focus, how do you work to transfer the allegiance to younger players so that you don't lose fans as players retire? Nicole, I'm sure you're thinking about this.
Yeah, of course. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's something that a lot of esports organizations are candidly trying to figure out. If you look at teams that, especially in North America, exist today, and then even more so globally, the big brands where a lot of fans follow are those that have won. But having a brand that's tied to win-loss is a very risky move, especially from my perspective. And so for brands that are trying to differentiate in the space by finding other ways to build allegiance, I think 100 Thieves is another esports org that really has leaned into the retail, the streetwear, the aspirational cool. G2 is our European counterpart, more of the villainous figure, the more punchy. And you see that some of these organizations are really trying to flesh out a mission statement that resonates not just with players who don't want to compete, but also the fans as well. I think the question touched a little bit on why do younger players want to come to an org, or is it just?
Or just how do you transfer allegiances to your younger players, right? As you bring new players to the game.
Oh, yeah. So, and also, I think this is the secret sauce of each team, right? Is the reputation in the space with your talent, right? Why would a player want to compete at an org like EG? The perks beyond just cash in hand, as David mentioned, are. I wish I was a professional League of Legends player because I'd make a ton more money than I make now. But there's a lot of other levers, right? Especially given the diverse set of interests and nationalities and representation that you find in the space. So we've actually, an experiment that I had carried out that now is institutionalized and has been successful is a lot of the perks that you would find at a traditional big fintech or tech company, we rolled out. And the initial pushback I got was players don't care about having CPAs provided or don't care about wellness initiatives, but PT, nutritionists, sports psychologists, financial guidance, those types of factors actually really resonate not just with players, but for the younger players, their parents and their agents, which has been really critical for us, showing difference in the market and attracting talent beyond just competitive skill and cash in hand.
Got it. One other question here. As mobile gaming and esports continue to grow, people are already looking towards the Indian market as the next frontier. What steps, if any, are you taking to enter this arena? Casey, is that
Which market
the
did you say?
India?
India?
Yeah.
Yeah, India is we're predominantly U.S. Our player base is predominantly U.S. today. I think we certainly think of India as one of the most attractive markets to enter, and it's really been a function of, as a startup, you pick your battles, but we certainly think we think India is going to be absolutely massive. And so it's, as we think about replicating, we're a two-sided marketplace business. So there are content creators and there are consumer end users. And the trick to entering a new market is you need both of those things concurrently if you're in our business in order to enter. So you need both content and players. And so you don't really want to go halfway in. And so I would say I can't say too much about exactly what we're doing there, but I would say it is very much at the forefront of our thinking, and it's been something we have chosen not to enter not to back into, but rather to go headlong into, and so we'll be there quite soon.
Great. So we just have a minute or two left before we wrap. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to name an esports brand outside your company that you admire and tell us why. Nicole, when you start, we'll go down the line.
In terms of other brands I admire, I think there's one other team, it's European-based, called G2, that does things fantastically and has existed for a long time. And we seek out, in terms of who we like to emulate and mirror, brands that do things ethically as well as keep competitive excellence at the forefront. So if you're a sponsor, still come to EG, but G2 is a good brand as well.
I would say really impressed by the work of Alienware to build out their kind of gaming-focused product line. It's incredibly intuitive. It's really spot on in terms of understanding the gaming space. And they've created a brand that I think really says gaming, but they're in the Dell company. So they have the umbrella to have an impact, I think, far beyond gaming as this thing grows.
What about you, Casey?
So I'm an entrepreneur building a kind of bottoms-up belief. They have this bottoms-up belief in the sports ecosystem, and I think one of the ironies of esports is that many companies are trying to take a top-down approach. So if you look at how companies like Activision are launching their Overwatch League, they're starting as a professional organization, and so I have a lot of admiration for the bottoms-up approach, and I think Riot's done a great job of that. But I think a brand that comes to mind for me is TSM, and so I look at the origins of Solo Mid, and they started not as a professional team, but as a community, a player community, and so I tend to admire that bootstrapped build from the ground up, even in an industry that is now awash with venture capital.
Great. So that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for participating. Why don't we give a big round of applause to our panelists.
Thank you, Saj.
Thanks, Saj.